Hello, everybody. Are we on stage yet?
And
Here's
we
the
are.
fun thing about doing things live
Testing,
is that
testing.
when you do them, they're live, whether you're doing the correct thing or not. So, hey, welcome everybody to the second edition of the Scaleway sessions. Two times is a coincidence. We'll see if we make it a third time. Apologies for the late start. We are still learning the streaming platform. We're still learning the tools. And the thing about being a computer professional is that it's a lifelong learning journey. And of course, we're on that journey together. My name is Dan. I am the head of developer relations here at Scaleway. And I am pleased that you were able to join us today again for the second edition of the Scaleway sessions. We are joined by another special guest by the name of Thibault. Thibault, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, Thibault here. I'm a product manager at Scaleway, in charge of everything Kubernetes. Dan, thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Well, thank you for volunteering to jump into this adventure. And being willing to take some shots and figure out whether find out the fact nobody knows what they're doing. I appreciate that. Joined as always by Diego and Eli. Diego, why don't you say hi? Diego's microphone is not working. We'll say hi to Eli. Why don't you say hello to everyone?
When you were saying earlier, being a computer person, it's a lifelong learning journey. I was like, you learn very rapidly not to trust computers in any way, shape, or form. So yes, my name's Eli. I am somebody who doesn't trust computers in any way, shape, or form, and I'm a developer advocate at Scaleway, which means I get to learn lots of interesting things and talk about them on stream.
Excellent, excellent. So we're going to let Diego work out his weird robot microphone issue. And we, of course, must assume that this is not, in fact, a harbinger of the robot uprising. And if it is, I just want to tell the robots that as a trusted media figure, I can be useful in rounding up and, making sure to bring the humans into line for whatever sort of salt mine activities you may have planned for us.
I love that Diego is the one of us with a proper microphone as well, and he's the one having problems.
And he's the one having the issues. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good setup, I think, for streaming, but Diego.
Well, he's got the fanciest lighting behind him, right? So, he's ready for Twitch.
It's a cloud, right? Is it meant to be a cloud? Because
yeah, it's a cloud. It's a cloud, right?
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's a cloud hat.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, after a few years of virtual conferencing and whatever, you'd think we'd have got this unlocked, but we absolutely don't.
100% not a solved problem. And we brought this up on the last stream as a really good startup idea. If you are out there and you're watching, you think to yourself, boy, I wish I could found a startup. Maybe your startup is figuring out how to put people's faces and sound on the internet in a way that works reliably. That could be an interesting startup idea. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? We're talking about really whatever we want because it's our show. But since Thibault is here, and he's a product manager, and Kubernetes is his thing, I figure that's a pretty good starting point to talk about, right? We talk about Kubernetes. So I was chatting a little bit with Thibault before the stream, a little bit a couple of days ago. And yes, we're going to talk about Kubernetes, but I also thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about what it is that Thibault does, right? You mentioned you're a product manager. Happen to be a product manager here at Scaleway, but you're a product manager in the Kubernetes. What does a product manager do? And for me as an engineer, what could a product manager do for me?
I assume all of you have been working with product managers in the past, right? But no, not really? No, Eli?
I've had, I'm trying to remember what the term is in Agile, like when you have your team, like the product, I guess they would call the product manager, but the one who goes out and manages stakeholders for you and protects you as the developer from having to have those conversations.
Product owners, perhaps.
Yeah, product owner. That's the thing I'm thinking of. Yeah. I don't know. I've worked in a lot of sort of very ragtag places, which means I've got a lot of experience in weird things and none in others.
And
that's the way it goes, right?
Do you have your own definition or view of what is a product manager doing?
Thibault turned the question around on you. What do you think a product manager does?
Oh, it's on me. Sorry, I thought, right. Hey. So what do I think a product manager does? I think a product manager manages products. would be my guess. But of course, so what's different then from a product owner, right? If we already established that product owner is a role, or at least some sort of thing that exists in the wild, we've established a product manager is something that exists in the wild. What would be the difference between those? So let me take some guesses. I'm just gonna take some guesses. All right, and we'll see how close I get. Fair enough. So I think of someone, if product manager, if you're managing a product, I would say part of your job would be to understand a little bit about what the thing is, how it's built, what sort of problems could be solved, or things could be built with. For example, this thing, you'd probably also need to understand about how this thing is used in the real world. You have to understand a little bit about the types of customers and environments where this thing is used. You probably also need to understand a little bit about how that product is marketed, how it's talked about, what it's going to mean when the word is evoked, what's the first thing that comes to people's minds. You're probably also going to want to have an understanding of a little bit of the technical side of things, right? Because in the world of computers, we have it's APIs and it's code and it's distributables. So kind of what form does that take? A little bit about the history of the thing, and hopefully also a little bit about the future of the thing. And you take all of these things and you sort of mix them together, and your job, and again, we're just spitballing here, would be to help ensure that all the different roles, engineers and marketing and support and excellence and whatnot, have a clear vision of how the organization, us in this case, are going to use whatever the thing is to ideally make some money.
You're a bit like the conductor of an orchestra. You have to understand the thing as a whole and all of the moving parts.
It's an image I've heard a lot, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are everything you said is crystal clear and accurate. There's one word in particular you said, which I think is the most important to what PM does. You mentioned the word problem. And I think that's really what we are about. We're here to really understand the problem and go deep into the why this is a problem. And I could go forever about this. And the problem indeed, and the customers. You also mentioned customers. That's really also what we're about. We're here to really reason the customers and know the customers because they buy technology, they use software to solve a problem, right? So we need to understand their problems, and we really need to know the customers. But indeed, it's not about only creating solutions for the problem. It's not only about being with customers. It's somewhere in between. That's why it's hard to define. Thank you for trying, both of you. And I think your definitions are right. And why I was saying this is, for each market where you go to in the US or in Europe and China, for each company you could work with, you'd have a slightly different definition of a PM. And so I could give you my perspective on what the job is.
Please do.
Scaleway. But again, it would not apply to what a PM is. It's just so many possibilities out there, right?
Okay, so here at Scaleway, and to harp on it, but we all happen to work for Scaleway, so here we go. What do you do here? You specifically, what do you do here?
Okay.
No pressure.
Broadly speaking, we spend time on strategy down to execution. What we do specifically is we pick the battles, right? Because there's just a limited amount of time and unlimited amount of things we could do, right? So specifically, we're here to say no to a million of things that we won't do so that we have the time to do the things that are right. I'm not going to say how we do that, but that's broadly speaking what we do. Say no to a million of things and choosing the right battles. Then, of course, we have to measure how that fight went, because you pick a battle, then, of course, you have to make sure this went correctly or not, and then take further actions based on that, right? And finally, you have to rally the troops all the time. I think somebody here mentioned indeed coordinating, orchestrating. So you rally the troops for the next fight. And overall, you're here to carry the flag of a product, in my case, everything Kubernetes, so that this flag is seen and understood within the company, within the market, and so on and so on. Now, if I see it specifically at Scaleway, and to put concrete terms of what they do day to day, is animating a squad, right? It's a cross-disciplinary team of about 10 talented people who do this all the time, right? They all work on this product, on different pieces of the product, but they all do something. And through this squad, orchestrating this squad, my main role is making sure that the information flows from the back end to the front end, to the documentation to the customer, and vice versa, right? Making sure that it's all aligned, all in sync. It's like moving parts. I mean, if you try to move your body to 5 different directions, physically speaking, you don't move, right? So we have to make sure we all go to the same direction, and we understand why, and we measure it, and then suddenly you deliver value, right? Yeah, I think that's my own definition of things.
It's a lot of what the term is like glue work. So work that can often go unseen, of like making sure that everybody knows the things they need to know and unblocking other people and coordinating. It sort of sounds to me like a role that's very full of that, which is nice that that's like a job in and of itself, because, as I say, so often this kind of work can go unacknowledged and it's so useful.
Well, I think is the most important action, and the one I love the most, to be honest, is speaking to customers, though. I think I speak to customers 2-3 times per week. I believe that if you are post-market fit, for any company, the biggest risk is that you start being desynchronized with the actual pains, the actual problems of your customers. You would assume they want things, and you build things on assumptions, but you don't test them. Your company becomes, if it's growing, any company, it will have silos, it will have bureaucracy, it will have processes and whatnot. And so your job is to really synchronize with what your actual customers are doing. So you mentioned usage at some point then, right?
You've got to be careful. If you keep talking like that, we're going to steal you for the developer relations team.
I think this is
not a joke. So no, but it's true. So I think you're saying here is a lot of these parallels, right? And our output, our focus on the developer relations side, we try to accomplish some different things ultimately with what it is that we're producing. But the way that we go about it is not dissimilar to the things that you're describing, right? Which is understanding problems, understanding pain points, understanding business cases and use cases, understanding the people and the communities that produce and use and consume these things. There are a lot of parallels, right? And it's the work of knowing all these things and keeping all of these facts in your head and building the bridges and the connections between all these things. And when you start to see, wait a minute, here's a collection of things and they all cross and intersect at this one spot, and that one spot where they intersect, that's something that's interesting. Like let's get right at that and see if we can do something right there. Right? So yeah, no, there's definite parallels there for sure. Well, so thank you. Really appreciate you answering that question. Definitely something I think to dig into more in the future. Perhaps we can talk a bit more about product management and the philosophy and whatnot on that.
There are many discussions or philosophies or mindsets or literature around that job, really.
I'm sure there is.
How about you?
I'm sure there is.
That makes a difference.
I'm sure there is. But you here are doing the project management. You're doing the project management around our Kubernetes products. Now, I don't really want to talk about our Kubernetes products specifically. If you're interested, you're watching the stream, go to our website, do the pointing and the clicking, and you can read about it. I would, however, like to talk a little bit about Kubernetes sort of in general. And Thibault and I had the pleasure, actually, of attending Kubernetes Community Day here in Paris. That was on Tuesday. Already feels like a month ago. It's been a wild week. And that was on Tuesday. It was a great conference.
The FOMO
I thought
was so real for me, I'll be honest. I would love to be there.
Yeah, no, the sessions were great. It was good keynotes, good everything. And we talked about Kubernetes, and we talked about the people that are using it. And we talked about the community. Kubernetes Community Day is sort of at the intersection of all that, right? So it's a conference series. Of course, there's Kubernetes Community Days, increasingly all over the world. If I'm not mistaken, the very first one was in Amsterdam in 2019. And then a thing happened, the thing that shall not be named, and they moved online. And now they're back in person, and they're happening in various places. I have a lot to potentially say about KCD France and how it went down. But Thibault, you were there. I believe this is the first time you've been to a Kubernetes conference as a part of our organization, whatnot.
Correct.
You've been not here in France for a while, right? So you're coming back, fresh eyes. What did that feel like? Does community seem vibrant? What's going on? Just thoughts on the conference.
First off, lots of people. I mean, I was in France and on the day of a strike, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So for those of you who aren't living in France right now, we're going through some stuff here.
Solidarity from the UK, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was not expecting as many people, to be honest.
There was like 1,000 people.
Right.
Which, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So not
Exactly.
bad. And it was the first time, the first conference. The organizers, right? So they did a great job again, rallying the troops, rallying the community.
Exactly. So despite the fact that there were some issues with transports and hotels and everything, getting 1,000 people into one place at one time is no mean feat. And there were people coming from other parts of France, people coming from outside of the country. It was really, really great. Look, I'm going to level with everybody on the stream. We're all speaking English right now, and that's fine. KCD was extremely French, so when they released the videos, they could, oh, well, these guys, they was on the stream, they talked about how great all the conference was. It's 100% in French. So if you don't speak French, at a future date, we'll talk about it at KCD or somewhere where they spoke English. But
Trope mal.
Trope mal. Yeah.
Yes.
But it was really good. One of the things that really I thought was interesting was, and this is going to sound like, oh, he's in marketing, but the actual vendor floor. And I've been to a lot of conferences over the years. Spent a lot of time at a lot of conferences and trade shows and stuff like this, of course, in my career. And sometimes you hit the vendor floor and it's just like watching some sort of weird infomercial channel, like the As Seen on TV, where they're trying to sell you like the chop knife or the ShamWow, and you're just like, what is happening, right? It didn't feel that way this time. This time felt more like, this time felt more like, hey, we're doing stuff in the space.
Can't read it, Diego.
And Diego, no, sorry, man, it's all swag.
Swag to get.
Was there swag? Yeah, there was swag, but I don't know if anybody remembers a few years back when the swag started to get out of control, where you could just you could feed a family of 12 just by walking around the floor for 5 minutes based on the stuff you could.
US last year, and I got like 5 pairs of socks, 12 t-shirts, notebooks, cookies. It was great because it was like my first big conference, and so I wasn't, now you can't pay me to take a t-shirt because I've got so many.
Yeah, for sure, and there's a whole thing we can get into on that. But I thought the vendor floor was honestly pretty solid, and seeing the number of organizations, both large and small, right, that are not just sort of jumping on the Kubernetes hype wagon, which of course there's definitely that, but which are coming with legitimate use cases, which are coming as legitimate actors into the space and going, hey, we use Kubernetes a lot, right? We run it. We're specialists in it. We have people who work at our companies that literally contributing to the code base, literally helping to write documentation. And we just want to meet other organizations and connect with other people who are doing similar things. And
like
that was
people coming to offer things rather than to take things.
Exactly. And I thought that was really interesting. It felt very different.
Dan, was it just me, or there was a clear split between? That's what I noticed when I arrived first thing on the floor. You mentioned, I noticed American firms at the back and French firms at the front, and I felt there was a political message, and obviously they would put their French sponsors at the top, but then the whole thing. Look, the name. Did you notice the name of the conference halls? Blue, red, white.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
That was the first thing I noticed.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So I don't think that was a mistake by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely the focus on, hey, we're French and we're doing a French thing was fairly strong.
Yeah, you saw it too, right?
I would say, beyond the fact that, of course, all the conference itself was in the French language. You know what? Why not? Right? I mean, why not? You know, putting France first at a French conference doesn't seem weird to me. In the same way that putting Poland first at a Polish conference, putting Australia first at an Australian conference, it doesn't necessarily seem weird to me. But I don't think it felt overdone, which is good. But before we descend into maybe areas of conversation that we might not want to, why don't we bring the conversation back to Kubernetes? So, couple of interesting outcomes, I think, in terms of, well, takeaways for me, in terms of the content, in terms of the talks I went to go see. I would like to specifically talk about the opening keynote, which was Solomon Hykes and Jerome Pedersoni there on stage, talking about, well, a little bit about Dagger, which is Solomon Hykes' new startup, right? Solomon, if you don't know, is one of the individuals that founded Docker, the company. And if you've not heard of Docker before, welcome to computers.
Yeah, this guy knows his way around a container, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And what I found really interesting is that they went through this, they're talking about all these things, they talk about DAG, which is DAG, that's a DAG, it's a DAG, that's a DAG. And then about halfway through, they were like, wait, stop, does everybody here know what a DAG is? A dead silence. They're like, oh, so we have been talking about this thing and this whole startup that we built around this thing called the DAG, and nobody knows what a DAG is. I'm not trying to dump on anybody, right? But that, I think, strikes to a fundamental issue with a lot of us as technologists, which is that sometimes we're so deep into a thing that we don't realize that the rest of the world isn't also deep into that thing.
It's something I've come across when writing talks. Like, I have a talk about user authentication, right? And I've spent so long thinking about this that I go, oh, this is all obvious. Nobody wants to hear me talk about this thing. And the thing is, it's not obvious. I've just spent so long thinking about it that it's obvious to me now. And obviously, yeah, that cuts both ways in that, you know, for me, what that means is that I'm like, oh, this talk isn't good, but maybe I get it wrong in a different way and just assume familiarity, which is, yeah, what you're saying happens here.
On a more soft touch, Dan, I wasn't here at the keynote, but I was watching part of it on a giant screen outside, right? And I saw you on that big screen. and you know what? During the whole day, I heard plenty of Kubernetes experts talking about one thing, one hot debate, the hottest debate of the day, which was, how do we pronunciate kubectl? Nobody knows. So again, you could be so deep and have all the certifications you want about Kubernetes.
Yeah. Do you mean how do you pronounce Quebec Tool?
Quebec Tool.
Yes.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And the whole day I heard about people saying, who cares? And other people saying, this is really important.
Yeah. No, truly, that is the greatest debate of our times. And also extremely niche.
There is an aspect of, like, if you as a community sort of deliberately or artificially choose something that actually doesn't matter to have all your heated debate about, it means that you won't get quite so heated about other things that might actually matter, and you want to have a more rational, reasoned debate. Like, you channel all of that community infighting and like pettiness into something that it like sandboxing it, you know? So
for sure. So I'd actually like to, again, I tried this and it didn't work because this is how our minds work. We ramble all over the place. But I do want to talk a little bit about Kubernetes. And I'm going to open the question up here. On the subject of things which seem obvious to us, but which maybe aren't obvious to everybody, right? Say you have a junior developer, or, you know what, I'm not even going to, no. You have somebody who's in the world of technology. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter what they do, doesn't matter what the background is. And they are coming into Kubernetes for the first time. Because everybody's got to start somewhere, no matter where you are in your career, right? You start somewhere with a new thing. And the new thing you're starting out with is Kubernetes. And they go, I've heard of this thing. You went to a whole conference on it. What is it? What's the answer? Who wants to go first?
We kind of talked about this a little last stream as well, where I was talking about I'm pretty new to Kubernetes. A lot of my knowledge about it comes from writing a talk about it to interview for this job. And my answer is, yeah, it's a thing for orchestrating containers, and there's lots and lots of different ways that you can configure this one tool, which makes it there's a lot to learn, which makes it quite daunting or intimidating to get into, maybe.
For sure.
And it's
Thibault.
something which, like, a lot of hobby projects might not have a use for, which eliminates one of the ways of getting your hands dirty with it.
So Thibault, someone's asking you. We've got a customer in front of you, right? A hot prospect. The SA's brought you in for some reason, right? It's like, what's a Kubernetes? And they go, I don't know. Ask Thibault. He's an expert.
What does it
Now
do?
what?
You mean?
Yeah. What is it? Just a question. What is Kubernetes, man?
The simplest image I have in my mind, I keep using, is that I see it as a thermostat to manage the temperature in your apartment, in your flat, in your house, that decides on your behalf what would be the best temperature, ideally, to manage all the people in the rooms, and turn off and on every piece of all the machines you have at home, making sure you can control everything. It's even smarter than anything like this. But yeah, that's the simplest thing you could see as a tangible product you would have in each of your houses. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Actually, I wouldn't have chosen that analogy, but now that you've drawn it, I want to chew on that a little bit further. I wonder if Diego's got his microphone issue worked out. Diego, do you want to try to tell us what Kubernetes is?
Bit louder.
Oh.
No.
All right. Well, you know what? Diego's going to join us with his melodious voice.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Oh, wow. That is choppy.
No. All right. So we are going to communicate with a complicated series of hand signals and body gestures when it comes to Diego going forward.
My housemates and I want to learn BSL, but that wouldn't be very useful for Diego because he wouldn't be using British Sign Language.
Excellent. Okay, so one of the things that comes up when I'm talking, when I'm out, I'm at the meetups, working, with a technical community, and this comes up. We get past what is Kubernetes? And we talk something about containers, something about orchestration, something about auto scaling. These are the sorts of culprits that often come up when we go this. Okay.
Sure.
Next one, of course, how we get started. And we touched on this last stream. You could use a managed product. You could run K3 or whatever. So, okay, fine. We get past that. And then, of course, everybody goes off and tries the thing, does a hello world, does the getting started, right? And then what's the next step? The next step after that is you're running a massively distributed project in a multiple cloud scenario. No, there's something in between those two. There's something in between getting started and 10,000 nodes spread across 3 cloud providers.
It's testing and testing and testing again on tons
Right?
of different setups, right? Yeah, definitely. You have, in the whole Kubernetes world, you see what is called the day 0 for design and day 1 for setting things up, and then day 2 should be maintenance and operations, right? This could apply to any kind of workloads you have. You could do that on a small project, or you could do that on a larger product. But in between, indeed, I've seen a lot of customers that keep testing a lot of new stuff. At each layer of the piece of software that is Kubernetes, they keep testing on new things. Right.
So let's dive into that.
Yeah.
What's testing a thing? What's a thing that could be tested?
So many possibilities, just looking at how many components that you have to synchronize to make your Kubernetes cluster working, right? You have so many possible layers. You could tweak the security. You could tweak the network. You could tweak everything you do with your pods and your containers. And so I've seen customers deploying all sorts of open source technologies and trying to configure it correctly for Kubernetes. Plus, with every new version that Kubernetes is bringing, right? It's an open source technology. It keeps evolving so fast. You have so many new APIs that keeps being promoted to GA that you can use, and then so many other APIs that are depreciated. So every time you update, every quarter almost, you have plenty of new possibilities. It's like constant playground to use. You know what I mean? So of course, technologists love it. There's so much happening with this one, but it's also a headache because if you don't keep track of what's coming up, very quickly your application is not functioning. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. I saw a tweet on Mastodon just today, actually, which was breaking down the semantic versioning of Kubernetes. So it starts with the 1, and that never changes, and you can ignore it. And then there's the minor revision number, and as soon as the minor revision number changes, everything breaks. And then there's the point release number, which is a random number, and you can ignore that too.
I saw that same post. I knew what you were going to say as soon as you started saying it.
So you mentioned a couple of different things, a couple of different layers of things you could tweak there, right? You did the network, the security, and it changes all the time. This to me does not sound like something that's production ready when you describe it that way, right? I mean, a thing that's changing constantly. I don't want to run mission critical infrastructure on a thing that changes with minor release versions that breaks everything. That sounds insane.
Also, if you're doing sort of every quarter there's updates that you have to take for security reasons, then I'm looking at what's live now and going, well, if in a quarter there's going to be a critical security update, that means that right now this isn't secure. You know, if something needs those updates so frequently, suddenly I look at it and go, hang on, so this thing, yeah, exactly as Dan said, it's not production ready. It's no version or like it isn't battle hardened, as it were, because no one thing has been around long enough to actually sort of stabilize, as it were.
Right. Let me rephrase it a little bit. Indeed, you're right, guys. There are minor versions coming every quarter, and patch securities. So the last part of your version number coming up a lot, right? So you could be safe for a while on minor versions just by patching the security, the last part of your version often. Okay. Indeed, you want to move from one minor to another from time to time, but ultimately you could be safe running on that minor for 2 years. Okay, that's what I've seen with our customers, and it's fine. I mean, usually managed Kubernetes services like Scaleway would indeed keep a support for at least 2 years on such versions, so you're fine. However, indeed, if you're 5-10 versions behind what is the current trend, you are in a red zone, I believe. So you have to move from time to time. It's not like you just set up the cluster, leave it there, leave it running. You'll find you're happy, your applications are scaling up and down, it works, it's magic, it's Kubernetes. But at some point, you have to get back hands-on and migrate from time to time. So the more often you do it, the easier it will be to get access to the latest version. You know what I mean, right? You're all developers here. If you wait for 2 years to do that, of course, you have breaking chance, quite a lot.
Yeah, the thing I'm sort of contrasting it with in my head is like Python versioning, where every couple of years, new Python version.
Yep.
But with staying on the old one, what you lose usually is it's not a security thing, and it's access to new features. And the headache that comes when you have to update because you know you need the new features is it allows you to, I don't know, if I started a new job now and they were using Python 3.5, I'd go, that's a bit out of date, but it's not that bad, even though 3.10 is out now, right? Whereas with Kubernetes, that would be much more of a, you know, is it that people will stay up to date more, even though that there is support for, 2 years for a given version?
It's a good question. Thibault?
There are many ways of answering it, depending on whether you're running your own cluster, your own Kubernetes, your own setup with, exotic versions of it, or doing a managed service. What I can tell you is only from my perspective, most of the customers at Scaleway have no troubles at all moving from one version to another. They're playing safe, meaning they move from one minor to another, often. Some of them are late kids, late players. I won't mention them, but if they see me on the stream, please update. And we're trying to push them to update from time to time. Others are fast movers. I can tell you, they move very fast. As soon as we release a new version, boom, they're on it. Now, in the middle, you have all the other customers who keep patching the security as soon as it is open. And by the way, there is an auto upgrade happening. So you can sleep well because you auto upgrade on the security patches. Whenever you fix the date on your calendar, you say, all right, I want these updates to be done on Tuesday, and we will do the patch update on every Tuesday when there is one coming up. So I don't, from my perspective, and for the setup where you are on a managed service, but I don't want to plug our offer. I'm just saying when you do it that way, usually it's fine. For the biggest parts. Okay, to be fair, every time there is a new version coming up, I have customers who are indeed in troubles because they did tweak the machine. You know what I mean? They did play around too much, and they love it. Of course, they want to config stuff, and there they can be stuck a little bit. So what they do is they test again. They test and debug and do a staging cluster, a development cluster. They test their applications on that new version first before they apply all these changes on their production cluster. So it's quite typical, again, to not put everything on one basket, all your applications on the production only. You want to have several clusters and see how things work. I mean, like development environments, really. Staging, pre-prod, prod. Same with Kubernetes. You don't just move straight from your local machine to a production cluster. That doesn't work this way.
Yeah. I suppose this is another example of things that are like daunting about Kubernetes. Is like if in order to make the decision to use Kubernetes in my startup, whatever, I have to understand all the nuances of the security patches and what's considered industry standard and where are the risks, and all of those like trade-offs are different with Kubernetes than with sort of the majority of other deployment options. That's one of the things that gives it this reputation of being quite complicated.
I'm with you. I mean, look again at the KCD conference Dan and I attended on Tuesday. I think part of the exhibitors, many of them were about security. Did you notice that, Dan? I mean, so many of the exhibitors were doing security for Kubernetes. It's a big thing. I also joined a conference from GitLab, and I heard 10 times the word security within the talk. Or maybe it's just me because I'm doing a lot of security and observability here at Scaleway. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased towards security, but I think this is a thing for the market right now.
Yeah, something I said in the last stream as well is that my sort of very layperson perspective, as someone who hasn't done a lot of Kubernetes work, is that securing a cluster seems really difficult to me, or it seems like it would be really difficult because there's so many different configuration options. You've got a lot of attack surface potentially, and you need to understand all of these different things in order to know that you're doing it securely. So yeah, I can see why there'd be a lot of work happening in the security areas of Kubernetes.
I could have expected even more talks around security at this conference, to be honest. But I suppose the organizers wanted to have a broader amount of topics. But I can feel that right now this is a large pain for everybody to address. Indeed.
Is there Kube Security Con? Can Scaleway start Kube Security Con France? If that's a big enough field.
Probably.
So, question here from the Twitch, so to speak. What does upgrading Kubernetes look like? Is it easy? Do I lose production during the update?
Excellent question. In 99.9% of cases, you're fine. So there's still obviously some chances that indeed you lose your production. And I've seen that a few times already in the short amount of time I spent at Scaleway. But usually indeed, Kubernetes is smart enough to make sure that it's, really, really redundant and that your containers will be fine, simply because the node will be, the instance where you're running your containers will be closed for a little bit of time. And we just say, all right, let's remove all these pods and move them to another place where it's safe. And once this node is empty, let's say, all right, now I'm going to upgrade you. And once it's upgraded, bring back the pods in it and move on to the next one. So this scheduling, these moving parts are making sure that your pods are always live and ready. Yet sometimes it happens that indeed there's a critical component that cannot be upgraded at some point, usually because you did a config that worked okay on a previous version, not with the next one. And that's why indeed it's important to test, as I said, on a different cluster before you do that on your production cluster. And yeah, it happens sometimes that indeed this draining scheduling doesn't work properly and the whole thing collapses. So that's why you want to have backups. And again, Kubernetes is really good at backups. So yeah, I've seen a few downtimes, but not that much.
To me, it seems quite unusual that you would have breaking changes in minor versions. My experience of semantic changes has always been that as soon as you have a breaking change in the software, so config that was valid becoming invalid, that's a major version change. But Kubernetes has decided that that's not how they're going to do their semantic versioning, apparently. Dan, you're muted.
I am muted. 2023, and we're still doing that. All right, so
Yes.
that of course speaks to that meme we mentioned earlier, right? Where
this will never ever change.
Yeah, exactly. The one doesn't change; just ignore it. The thing in the middle, which means nothing should break, will break everything, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess what's the safest way forward there, right? Like if you're just, you're just out there trying to do your job, and a new Kubernetes version comes out, and you're looking at that going, oh, should I upgrade, or is this going to cost me my weekend? How do
is
you
it going to
know?
cost me a lot of compute resources spinning up a new cluster to test?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's the best way to figure out if a new Kubernetes release is going to be just a smooth upgrade or a massive foot gun, basically?
Okay. I think then you know when you're playing too much with Kubernetes and when you've been tweaking stuff to play around, you know that something will break up at some point. That's my assumption. Meaning, if you've been safely deploying your containers with, out-of-the-shelf technologies, you'll be fine, absolutely fine, because you're not playing with the exotic feature gates, APIs that Kubernetes are giving you. You know what I mean? You're just doing the standard stuff. In that case, you sleep well, you'll be fine. Indeed, if you've been playing around with this, if you've been tweaking the system, of course, you're exposing yourself to some challenges. But I think if you've been tweaking enough Kubernetes, it means you have the lore to do it. And I think you should be fine also to troubleshoot it to a certain extent. Does that make sense? It's like you come on, you open your car, you play around with the parts, you're tweaking stuff. Okay, you might break things, but you must know that at some point.
I've avoided the upgrade warranty on my cluster by tinkering with stuff that, it's assumed that by having done so, I know how to fix it.
Maybe not 100% of cases, because you could just be fooling around and breaking stuff without noticing. But in many instances, I think, I'm not saying you deserve it. I'm just saying you know that's it's a challenge, it's a risk what you take, what you're doing. You know what I mean?
As a newcomer to Kubernetes, how would I tell the difference between things I can do that are within that, you're safe, you're fine sandbox, and things where I'm venturing beyond the edges of the map? Like, is that documented?
I know. I think you learned it the hard way.
You suffer first.
I mean, as a developer advocate, my hope would be that as the technology matures, people have to learn things the hard way less and less.
Correct. No, I'm 100% with you. I think I saw a number saying there was only 16% of developers worldwide that know about Kubernetes. And so there's a long way to go, right, for this technology to be fully adopted. And I really hope that by simplifying everything, this whole complexity, and that's my job actually as a PMI. That's what we're trying to achieve: simplifying everything, making sure our customers can scale and secure everything. If I can every single day move this simplicity by 1%, it's already a great achievement, and I hope this will indeed bring more and more people to this Kubernetes environment. But I know it's a challenge. I mean, that you all know it. You know, Kubernetes is both fancy and hyped and complex, and that's why people love it.
Like, I find Diego could still contribute audio.
What was that?
Yeah, yesterday I finally got around to reading Joel Spolsky's blog post about leaky abstractions, which is a term I've heard for years, and this whole idea that like you provide abstractions to let you more sort of clearly think about problems that you're solving, and so Kubernetes being an abstraction over containers, and those being an abstraction over like runtimes and file systems and all sorts of things, and the idea that sometimes, well, they're never perfect, right? And so sometimes you're going to have to know about the underlying technology when you're using something that's manipulating that. So I don't know, knowing a little bit of C programming helps you understand why Python handles objects in memory the way it does, for example. My impression is that Kubernetes is quite leaky, and that it's, in order to use it well, I do have to understand what it's doing. I don't know if that's something that's contributing to it being so complicated, but and obviously it is solving problems for people, otherwise it wouldn't be as successful as it is. But it's interesting to me that in order to use it sort of very adeptly, you do actually have to still have this very grounded knowledge of what it's doing and the resources and the traffic and all the things that are going on inside it. It's not just plug and play.
No, it's not the simplest piece of technology I've been working with. Definitely. You keep relating to Python and Python and so on and so on. So
That's my background as a
yeah,
developer.
yeah. That makes total sense indeed. And it's not as, I wouldn't say easy, because no technology is easy, but it's not as, quick in a way in learning it, and as well as plug and play as just importing a library or framework and then reading the documentation and testing stuff and deploying it. It's like this giant beast that keeps moving, and that you have to understand all the different parts, otherwise you get multiple legs and it becomes a monster. Do you know what I mean? So that's just a much different piece of software, as I said, than a programming framework. And that's why it's really hard at the beginning to wrap your head around it. And I think, many years until I can really say, I know what's Kubernetes.
Yep.
So, you mentioned it being maybe not the easiest piece of software, the easy bit of kit, right, to get into. And that's fair, right? Some things are easier than others in life. There's no reason. It's okay. But as Eli, you mentioned also, it's clearly solving problems. It's clearly scratching an itch, or else it wouldn't be as popular. It wouldn't have the hype train. It wouldn't have 1,000 people at a conference on the subject, et cetera, et cetera. And also, Thibault, you mentioned that there were a lot of what seemed to be security types of vendors, projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, certainly at KCD France. Actually, I was at KCD Amsterdam just a couple of weeks ago, and there too, there were a lot of vendors whose once again, I feel like a shock DJ on a Miami radio station. This is amazing. That were, basically just trying to say it what it is, right? Sell you things to make managing Kubernetes easier, right? Like ultimately, that's okay. Make it easier, make it more secure, make it less painful, so on and so forth. And one of the things that came up in a couple of conversations with some people who were there to learn about Kubernetes for the first time is it feels overwhelming, right? Like when you walk into a new programming language for the first time, you get like a little how-to, you get a little hello world, maybe a sandbox in your browser to play with, right? Some languages will have, how does this compare to C? How does this compare to JavaScript? And then you can like take things you already know, paradigms you're already familiar with, and how does that translate into this new programming language? Okay, like you can sort of ease into it. And then like here's some getting started repos, and you can sort of, okay, like this, now we're learning a new programming language, and it's really, really nice, right? And then you go to PyCon, for example, right? You go to PyCon, and some of the talks maybe about some internals don't really, you're not there, but you'll get there, right? Because it's a programming language, and if you're a programmer, it doesn't matter what the programming language is. You can get programming languages, right? You can learn another language. That's just how it goes. And I've gotten feedback time and time again, which is that that's not what the Kubernetes journey feels like. The Kubernetes journey feels like, oh my God, what is happening? And it's so big. There's such a huge ecosystem. There's so much, like it feels like you have to know just to get started. How could someone getting into it even begin to deal with that sense of feeling overwhelmed?
Dan, I'm with you on this one. At the conference, I've had many discussions around me, not a talk, not an exhibition, whatnot. I heard people chatting about upskilling. Upskilling was there every time. And I'm not surprised. I mean, there's so much you have to learn about Kubernetes to keep track on, just to start with, and then to keep track on what's coming up. There were exhibitors around learning. There was WeScale, as far as I remember, and a few others that are doing trainings quite a lot. But you have to keep learning all the time. And then I come from the edtech industry. All right, I spent 6 years there before moving to the cloud, and I know that consistently every year, Docker and Kubernetes have been at the top of the trending charts from every edtech player. Udemy, Udacity, you name it, anything. This is a really hot topic. Everyone wants to learn. Not everyone. that would be too much. A lot of people want to learn those skills.
I guess my question is, are there small problems that Kubernetes can solve? Because when I'm thinking about the hello world and the ramping up on a programming language, I'm thinking about, oh, I'm writing a little script to, I don't know, calculate something for my own needs. I'm writing a Python package to help me make knitting patterns or something, or do a cross stitch generator, like little things that then you can have projects that are increasing in complexity, and you can learn how to use the new technology to solve each one. But I feel like with Kubernetes, the problems that it solves start at a size and complexity that isn't, that you only find in industry and not as a hobby. Can you think of any sort of small problems that you could solve with Kubernetes that could be used for that kind of upskilling?
It's a tough one.
Listen, we found a niche in the market. New startup just coming up with that kind of stuff. Great.
Well, while Thibault is ruminating on that, we'll give him a moment because I realized we put him on the spot with that one. This is not, maybe doesn't even have the answer that we're looking for, and maybe that's the conclusion we draw from it. And some things only work at certain scales, right? And that's just kind of how things are. If I've got a little garden in my backyard, right? And I think to myself, yeah, exactly. Like I can't feed myself from my little garden. It doesn't matter if I literally go in my garden every single day and spend 8 hours a day in my garden. There is no way that my 2 square meters of earth is going to be able to feed me.
Depends
right? There's no small scale industrial farming.
Yeah.
Right? There's no beginner project for a GPS navigated John Deere tractor.
Yep.
Right? Is that maybe the case with Kubernetes? I don't know.
It is just heavy duty machinery for heavy duty jobs. Yeah.
Well, Eli, I have, as I told you earlier, I keep meeting a lot of our customers, and I keep asking them consistently, what is Kubernetes, bringing in terms of value to you or to your end customers? Why do you use Kubernetes in the first place? I mean, that's really important to know, right? And from time to time, I hear simply, it's simplifying my life for deployment. Okay, so it's not about orchestration or scaling or microservices or whatnot anymore. It's simply because it is simplifying my deployment. That's what I hear. So then if you dig a little bit deeper, how do you deploy then? What do you do? And some of them would say Terraform. Okay, great way. Infrastructure as code, you script things, it comes up nicely. Okay, fine, fair enough. But not that often, actually. A few told me, well, we use Helm. Okay, that another way of deploying applications. And others said simply, I love YAML. What? So I don't know. Perhaps I'm not answering your question, Eli. I'm just saying a few cases I've seen before. Some people find that YAML or Terraform are just a simpler way than to deploy, rather than, I don't know, pushing a piece of code on a server like we used to do. You remember the FTP servers? Remember how we used to deploy code that way?
I'm too young for that. I have used Subversion when I started.
Right?
But yeah, I'm a baby, so I don't remember some of the old school stuff.
Anyone will have a different way of deploying stuff to that, but a few people find Kubernetes simpler, and perhaps it's not these ways of deploying one by one. Each YAML file might not be totally automated, but it is fine for a certain amount of customers who are very happy with that way, and they've been moving to the whole container thing recently, and they find Kubernetes as, well, let's give it a try. I spin off just 1 node, 2 nodes here and there, and that's fine. And they have a very small app. It could be something internal. It could be something that is just for development. And they have it on Kubernetes for a few years, and they test out the waters. And that's fine. You need to always have your critical applications there, because it's said to be meant to scale, sent to be redundant and high available and whatnot. It doesn't have to be for all the fancy stuff that the big guys are doing. You could just deploy and test for a while on a certain amount of small nodes, and that's fine.
Maybe I should put my little HTML, CSS personal website on Kubernetes to learn.
Yeah, in the meantime, yeah, that's a good way of learning. In the meantime, maybe a little bit over engineering as well.
Yeah. Oh, and
Like,
developers, we love that. So
right. I think that's the thing as well, right? Taking 10 steps to do something that you can do in just a few with
oh, is
other.
that XKCD comic of like the time spent to do something versus the time spent to automate it? Like, yeah.
Possibly.
I like the idea. I definitely spend 3 days like gluing together enough sed and awk and bash scripts to like munge a bunch of log files and things together when I could have just like, I don't know, sent it to Datadog on the free tier and called it a day, right? But of course, we're engineers. We like to do this sort of thing. So we are, despite the fact that we have not in fact been streaming all of us together for 60 minutes, we started a little bit late because of technical problems, because we're all still learning things. We are bumping up against time. And I do want to risk. Diego's getting good with the soundboard.
Yeah.
He has no mic, but he's here with the sound. That's
yeah, exactly.
I have to try.
Hey, the microphone worked.
Last
Yeah.
minute. Last minute.
Amazing.
It's an end of
Yes,
stream
it is a
miracle.
It is supposed to be a cloud. That's what I wanted to say. It's a blob. So that's what clouds are. And yeah, don't let the UI deceive you. I'm not an expert yet on streaming. And now I
I'm
can
so
go.
glad we got your voice on stream for even
Yes,
just a
exactly.
moment.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us today, Diego. Super appreciate it. Glad you can come out. But seriously, thank you, Thibault, for taking the time out with us today, and again for being willing to come on this adventure with us as we launch ourselves into the streaming world. And thank you to everybody who's watching us on the YouTube, watching us on the Twitch, watching this after the fact. Thank you to the people who joined us on our Scaleway community Slack, the people who are commenting on Twitter. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your support. And we're going to be streaming again next week. So watch our Twitter and Twitch and everything for that. So we'll get the time and date out for that. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Diego, of course. And I guess we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.